Commissioners, if you're ready, allow me to welcome everyone to a very special meeting of the City of Morro Bay Planning Commission, Wednesday, July 5th. We are at Shoreline Cavalry Chapel, Morro Elementary School, and so happy and pleased to be here. Allow me to introduce some special guests. Tonight we have with us all our previous history panelists who are here in the audience, and we'll introduce them later. And this is our fifth and final information session around history stories in Morro Bay. Also, let me welcome we have, I think, all five city council members, and so happy you guys could be here and join us. My name is Bill Roshan. I'm chairperson of the Morro Bay Planning Commission. I would like to introduce Vice Chair Mike Rodriguez. I'd like to introduce Commissioner Joseph Ingrafia, and I'd like to introduce Commissioner Eric Meyer, and Commissioner Asia King is on our Zoom. So she's participating from home, and lovely to have her join us.
Thank you.
What's that? Oh, really? Is that better, worse? Better. Okay, thank you. And I'm getting some feedback. Corey, Ray, are we okay? All right, thanks. Thank you, guys. So let me go ahead and see if we can start. First, a thank you to the Shoreline Cavalry group. Pastor Ed is here. Ed, could you wait for us? Thanks for being here. And Richard Sardowski. Richard, are you here? Richard, thank you. Thank you guys for allowing us to use your space. Calvary Chapel has been here for 20 years. So it's really nice to be able to visit in their sanctuary. With that, I also want to welcome all the people that are on Zoom and TV. And we also have another special guest, which is our interim city manager. So Greg, thank you so much for being here. And let's see, we do have a quorum, so I'll call the meeting to order. And what I'd like to do is do a quick introduction so we know what tonight's session is about. So before I turn it over to Eric, who is the one we really need to hear from, a student of the school, I'd like to say that tonight is the fifth and final information session on the session held by the Morro Bay Planning Commission on the history of Morro Bay through stories. This is not complete, but we've enjoyed learning from Morro Bay from our elders. On a number of topics and places, we've included stories on the history of the harbor, the experience of the fishing community, the tribal history of Morro Bay, the art and culture of early Morro Bay, and stories of the history of downtown. Tonight is about a verbal history and experiences of Morro Bay Elementary School. We are pleased to have James Papp with us tonight. He's an architectural historian from San Luis Obispo, and he is not only recognized, but is, I think, an incredibly fun man to listen to. And we'll offer historic snapshots of the elementary school and its campus and place it in context for us on Morro Bay. One last thing, to be fair and clear, this is not an agendized discussion of the future of the school campus. Instead, it is the opportunity to learn and to appreciate what history was and is in our town of Morro Bay. The consideration of historic preservation ordinance is a priority of our city council and the planning commission. Again, it is not agendized tonight for that discussion. So tonight we have a chance to all come together and consider our past and our future stewardship. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Eric Meyer, who will first give us some thoughts and then introduce James.
Hi all. So this school was built in 1935. Morro Bay was founded a little earlier than I probably all know, but everything north of the diagonal line that runs through town was the Rancho San Bernardo, And Rancho San Bernardo was owned by Quintana, and we put Quintana Road down there, and ADOT. In 1935, Pedro and Hughes Quintana sold 5.7 acres right here of their property, which is north of that big diagram line. That's two counties. That's why there's a triangle park. They sold this 5.7 to the school district for $400 an acre. I think.
I'm sorry. There we go. We'll try that again. I'll start. Anyway, the 5.7 acres here was bought by the school district from the Quintana family in 1935. And the school was under construction in 36 and 37. And prior to that time, the school had been over on the corner where that empty gas station lot is. I believe it's on the corner of, is it Beach and Main, the northwest corner. Of note here, right behind you, just because I'm staring at it, that painting on the wall at one point in time was on the other wall over here behind me. It was a scrim for a play, and that painting was painted by one of Morro Bay's first and most famous artist residents. His name was Charles Robinson, Charles Hoxie Robinson, nicknamed Robbie by his friends. And he painted many scrims for many plays, evidently. This is hearsay, but that one remains, and it's here, and it's fun to look at. I don't think it has anything to do with Morro Bay, although as kids, we all tried to imagine that was part of Morro Bay from some past time. There's a lot of interesting people that went through this school that still live in the area. There's a few famous teachers that were here. There's one particular famous teacher, Mr. Corselli, who most of you have probably heard about, Bozzo Corselli, and his little music room was out back. And Bozzo was born in Georgia, the country of Georgia, but his dad was killed by Stalin because he was an enemy of the state for speaking out against Stalin, and he escaped through Germany and was held as a prisoner in Nazi Germany, but then escaped to California and studied music here and studied music in Germany, and came back to Morro Bay in the 50s and developed a music program that then launched the careers of many famous musicians. There's a conductor in Montreal by the name of Nagano, Kent Nagano, who's pretty famous locally. The Nagano family themselves are pretty famous locally, and one of the Nagano relatives was Mary Nagano, who was the school secretary here, essentially the mom of the school. If you wanted to do anything in this school, you had to go through Mary. If you were a bad kid and sent to the principal's office, nobody I know that is sitting behind the mic here ever did that. But you would go through Mary to go to the principal, who's Mr. Canali, and Mr. Sam Canali, who I believe is the second or first cousin to our other commissioner over here, which is a strange coincidence. Mr. Canali, my favorite saying from him is he was always trying to give you these little teachable moments, and he would say, the principal is your pal. And he was just trying to tell you the difference between principal, PLE, and principal, the principal, PAL. And as you know, I still remember that 50 plus years later, the stupid things you remember from being a student in school. Mr. Corselli, above and beyond being a music teacher, is a sculptor, and he developed the chessboard down on the waterfront and with some other folks. And he also developed the sculpture of the rock, which is just above the traffic circle downtown, where the water runs. I think occasionally when the pump's working, the water runs over that thing. And he did the pelican sculpture at the top of the Centennial Stairway. And his house is on Piney Way, and it was a kind of a cool modern redwood house. And as kids, we all loved going over there because they had every instrument known to God in that house, and you could learn to play the sitar or the piano or whatever. If you didn't have it, there was one there. Bob Bennett, who was one of my neighbors, was a musician that studied under Mr. Corselli, and he is a pretty famous trumpeter now. Sal Garza is a famous concert violinist, also from my same grade. It's just interesting how many students that went on after listening to him. The school itself, I don't have, because I was just a kid, it was mostly my memories are out on the playground. And I was telling the little tour group earlier that the memories I have are things like when the handball courts went in, because that was my favorite thing to do. The memories of climbing through, there's a hedge between here and the dollar stores, which there used to be Williams Brothers and Thrifty over there. So as kids, we tried to go over and get an ice cream if we were daring enough during school, because they were 5 cents. But there's a hedge there, and that hedge was trimmed by the gardeners at some point about 6 feet up. And at 6 feet up, the branches all branch out, which creates this pathway through the hedge at about 6 feet up. And it takes you about an hour. But if you're a kid, you can go from tree to tree to tree to tree after school and do the hedge as sort of a rite of passage. I have some other notes about we had just on the hall, in the hall down here on the right was a nurse's office. But if most of the accidents that happened at school didn't happen while school was in session, because you're a kid here, nothing really good got going on during school hours. All the good stuff happened after school closed. And so if you got hurt on your bike or I don't think skateboarding quite happened until the 6th grade, but mostly fights or bikes. The nurse was actually the janitor. And so most of us knew the janitor pretty well, because he was the one putting your Band-Aids on or fixing your bloody nose or counseling you on why you shouldn't be doing whatever it was you were attempting to do, why you shouldn't really try to go up the side of the school to get into the tower, et cetera. And no, there wasn't a basement. Oh, there really is a basement. But we were all told, no, there wasn't a basement, just so we wouldn't bother going to search for the entrance. Other things that strike me about school here were the mimeograph machine, because the Xerox machine didn't exist yet. And there was the little mimeograph machine, and it was somewhere down the hall there. And everybody in the school, all the teachers had to use that machine. And if you remember, it has that smell, and it's an ammonia smell, and they have that sort of dark purpley blue. And yeah. And well, that smell was, I don't know, it's kind of like a Pavlovian thing. It just reminds me of school whenever I smell ammonia, which is a weird tangent. The other thing I could think of is that they're outside of the 3rd grade classes, which are down that hall on the east side. There used to be a jungle gym out there, and every kid I know can tell you the taste of the metal of the jungle gym. And that's a random thing, but do you remember the taste of the metal of the jungle gym as a kid? I do. It's just stupid, but it's funny. Another thing, Mrs. Fisher, when you were in the 6th grade, suddenly it was split classes. So you had Mr. Gregory and Mrs. Fisher, and Mrs. Fisher taught sort of humanities, and Mr. Gregory taught sort of science, and Mrs. Fisher taught choir. And so there's some part of my brain that's relegated to Mrs. Fisher, because I can still remember many of the songs that she taught us in the 6th grade. For instance, dinosaurs, dinosaurs, they are no more. Aren't you glad that we don't have those dinosaurs? Is the line from the 6th grade choir recital that we sang on this stage, and probably in dinosaur outfits, although I don't remember that part. It's just silly. But as every day at lunch, if you were lucky enough to have a parent that had a little bit of money, which most people in Moroway didn't have much money. You know, we were all wearing Sears tough skins. We weren't wearing Levi's, and those tough skins had iron-on patches on the knees because we couldn't afford too many pair of tough skins. And the line out there to get into the cafeteria for lunch, you either had a bag lunch or you had a hot lunch. And the hot lunch is because you had a little bit of money, because you had 35 cents a day to pay for hot lunch. And that was, you had a little, Jim was just reminding me, Jim's here somewhere, Jim Warner, who lived across the street from me, and we were both here in the same grade. But the little punch card where you would punch, this is the kitchen over here to my right, and you would get punched a little card. You had the tray with the little compartments in it, and they would plop down whatever it was as the main course and whatever was the vegetable, and the little tiny, the world's smallest carton of milk, you know, probably hated by all the garbage people now. Anyway, the desserts, the one that was most coveted, I think, was a little apple strudel. There was an apple strudel that we all would kill for. Otherwise, it was mostly just relatively boring. But the challenge was at lunch was to see if you could take the plastic spoon and flick the pea up onto the rafter. And if there was ever a roar heard in this auditorium, it's because someone succeeded in getting a pea onto that rafter. And I suspect that they're still up there. Yeah, well, we won't go into that. I also heard about, there's a hook up there somewhere because the first principal of this school, whose name escapes me, who was the principal before Morro Bay was incorporated. So he really had to scrap for money because there was no PG&E yet. He was scrapping for all the money he could get to make this place go. Because it was so noisy in here, they had a hook and they draped parachutes from this hook up there to give some sound deadening to the room. And I've been looking for the hook tonight, but I haven't had a chance to search very hard. So if anybody finds that hook, I wonder if it's still up there. Just interesting stuff. Some of the other students I remember that went here, there was most of the kids, their families had a business of some sort, you know, like the Barquette family, for instance. Tom Barquette was one of our classmates, and his older brother, Joe, and older brother, Anthony, their parents had a restaurant on Morro Bay Boulevard called El Matador, and it's where the little Thai food place is now on the first block above Main Street. And that family, they bought Harry's Upholstery. The guy about sidetracked. So Harry's Upholstery is a little bit like the Princess Bride movie. Harry was like centuries ago, and there's been Harry, and then there was Herman, and now there's Anthony and Thomas and Joe. Anyway, that family's still in town. They still own Harry's. The Dillards, I would go fishing with Brian Dillard, who's we're second graders, mind you. How many parents now let their second grader wander down to the shore and go fishing by themselves? Brian and I would go fishing. Brian Dillard's dad ran Dillard's Automotive down in Quintana. Brian then ran Dillard's. Everywhere you went was some kid that was related to some parent who had some business. And that's just the way Morro Bay always was. There was Rod Kleinhammer, his dad was a contractor. His dad was part owner in the Golden Tee, which is now the Inn at Morro Bay. Danny Brebs, everybody knows the Brebs family. Belinda Gregory, her dad was a teacher here. Paul Dunn, across the street. His dad worked at Vandenberg and designed rockets. There was always some crazy fun stories about the locals. David Cutter, another neighbor, Dorothy's son. David teaches music down in Los Angeles. He's another success story out of Bozzo Corselli. I'm all over the place, sorry, but it's fun to just chat about the random memories. The school in general, you know, when you leave and come back, it's fascinating to see what you remember. I remember this room probably more than any other rooms. This and the butterfly roof rooms in the 6th grade, because if you were a good kid, you got the privilege of being able to hold the pole to latch into the little hook on the window and open the window. And Tony was just reminding me of that earlier. And it's just funny stuff. So we brought out an historian here tonight to talk about the buildings and to talk about what they might mean to the city. I mean, Morro Bay doesn't have a lot of famous big buildings. You know, we have a few little treasures here and there, but this is really Morro Bay's biggest famous building, for lack of a better word. It's its only real, before the city was a city, before the city had a city hall, before there was a vet's hall. This was the meeting place. This is where everybody came. Before there was a city council, people would bitch about what was going wrong at school. And it was the only thing they could talk about, you know, oh, the school district, blah, 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 because that was the only non-private entity in town. And so it was the center of town for a long time. And so I have a friend, James Papp, and James is an architectural historian. And he's been on the Architectural Review Board and the Cultural Heritage Board in the city of San Luis Obispo for years. And he's got a really good mind about architecture and has just got a lovely way of presenting and talking about buildings and the way they relate to humans and the way the humans react. And so we've invited him tonight to come chat with us a little bit about the stories of the architects that designed this building and the two buildings out there. You can join us at the 5th spot over here.
There's my button. And can everybody hear me? It's really a pleasure to be here. And part of the reason it's really a pleasure to be here is when I first moved to San Luis Obispo County, the first thing I did, I think this may be the ideal distance, no feedback, was an exhibition about the Morro Bay power plant at the History Center in San Luis Obispo County, of San Luis Obispo County. And the reason I did that exhibition, now I'm going to go into a Proustian thing like Eric. The reason I did that exhibition is my girlfriend was the executive director there. And so she said, oh, could you do a timeline? And I got so excited about this timeline, about the history of Morro Bay, about the history of the power plant, and about the history of energy in California and how they all wound together. And there was a moment at 2 a.m. as we were putting it up on the wall when tears were shed and words were said. But that exhibition kept reappearing, and it was at the Science Museum at Morro Bay. And I gave a talk about the Morro Bay power plant, and it emerged again. It's kind of like Frankenstein. It never just keeps popping back, or the Terminator. I don't know. But I have a very soft spot for Morro Bay in my heart because it's a really exciting place for architecture. And I think one of the things about living in a kind of a small, remote place, and San Luis Obispo County was always the most remote place, you know, equidistant from Los Angeles and San Francisco, is you don't necessarily realize how important your stuff is. It's just, you know, kind of second nature. And then you discover that it's related to all kinds of things that are going on throughout the world and throughout the region. And so that's important. And the other thing I think is important, buildings all speak a language. And if we forget the language, they don't communicate to us anymore. You know, it's easy to, I'm sorry to say, it's easy to kill a person whose language you don't understand. It's easy to demolish a building whose language you don't understand. If you take away, in a sense, their humanity. So a lot of what I do is at least talk about what the building is trying to say. And I'll use one last little illustration. This last weekend, I was visiting my sister in Topanga Canyon. I'm an architectural historian, she's a biologist. We walked through the canyons, and every time I saw a flower, and there were lots of flowers because of all the rain, I said, what's that? What's its name? And she would tell me its name, and she would tell me, I mean, all these extraordinary names: Farewell to Spring, Lance Leaf, Live Forever, just all these crazy folk names that were given to flowers, but they all told a story. The lance leaf Live Forever grows out, straight out of a rock, hence the name. Western Pearly Everlasting, if you put it in a vase, it dries and looks the same forever. So all of these little details have significances. And it's very easy to say, this isn't important if you don't listen to the language that flowers are speaking, or that buildings are speaking, or that people are speaking who live in a community and tell stories of their past and center their past on some building. So I'm going to, I don't know who has control of the, you have control of the, let's just go through, this is kind of in the wrong order because the order I sent Eric through, but I want to go very fast and then just have people ask questions. And if you have a question in the middle, just raise your hand or shout out. So this is a picture of Frank Wynkoop. There are two architects involved in the school, and they're really interesting because Frank Wynkoop, he was at the age of 17, according to the US Census, actually 18, he was a soda jerk in Pomona. And then 14 months later, he was an architect in Long Beach. How did that happen? He was an early bloomer. At the age of 19, he was discussing, had designed two apartment buildings in Long Beach. He was always the head of his firm. He jumped around from firm to firm. And the other architect who's involved in this building was a very late bloomer. So ironically, their first buildings, they're about 10 years apart in birth, but their first buildings happened pretty much at the same moment. So Frank Wynkoop, let's go to the next slide. This is one of his early buildings. He's the head of an architectural design firm. He couldn't call himself an architect because he didn't have an architectural qualification. And here he's designing this extraordinary roof. He was very into roofs during his entire career as an architect. Here's the Rose Garden Dance Pavilion in Long Beach, 1924, I think. And let's move on. Well, it's a kind of a, let's go back. You've asked me a question I don't really know the answer to. It's a parabolic roof. It's not a straight arch. There are all kinds of different arches, but he clearly was looking for a way to create a structure where you didn't have columns in it. We don't know I don't know the materials of it, but if you think of the dance pavilion was down in Pismo Beach, that was made out of corrugated iron, which was the first wonder material, as much as it's hated in terms of its appearance. It was a wonder material because you could bend it along the corrugations and it would hold itself up. So here you're looking for something that basically holds itself up, and I would call it an early parabolic arch before parabolas became a big deal. It reminds me of the restaurant in the middle of LAX, if you've ever seen that. That's when the period when parabolic structures became very popular. So where did he get this design? Who knows? He was a soda jerk, and then suddenly he was an architect, or at least an architectural designer. So who is he borrowing from to do these really sophisticated designs? And the other guys in his firm were junior to him. He was the leader. That's extraordinary. He's doing this at about age 21 with a high school education. So let's move on to the next one. And here you're seeing him do these really, you know, you almost see this building, which is not by him, in this design. A Spanish Revival was huge. It overtook Mission Revival because Mission Revival was not considered sophisticated enough. Hearst Castle, originally they were going to make it a arts and crafts bungalow. Then they were considered Mission Revival, and then finally Spanish Revival was the thing they chose. So here's one of Frank Winkoop's early, very elegant designs. And next one, we're going to gallop through these as fast as we can. Here is this is on the National Register of Historic Places. It's the Delano High School Auditorium. And this is an important moment that's related to this building because this was done, I believe, in 1939, and this is federal money. This is a style called Public Works Administration Moderne, or PWA Moderne for short. You see it at the county courthouse. That's PWA Moderne because of all the federal money that was coming out, and it was a style that was both streamlined, related to streamline moderne, but giving a kind of, you know, all those little striations on it going horizontally, but also it was supposed to be impressive. It was supposed to be, you know, communicate government stability and not just craziness. E.g., the county courthouse is PWA Moderne, and then the Fremont Theater across the street from it in San Luis is sort of it's Fred and Ginger. That is streamline moderne. Okay, next slide, because I'll get distracted and start talking about all the things I love. Here is a 1938 building on the right, which Winkoop designed, again in this PWA moderne style. This is his first project in San Luis Obispo County, which is in the school at Shandon. You see on the left what we call Richardsonian Romanesque, which was at the turn of the century the style that communicated solidity and stability. And then everybody wanted to be modern all of a sudden in the late 30s. And the next slide. Now, and that is Frank Winkoop's house. And that is being written about all over the world in the Wall Street Journal and you name it. It's in Carmel. And it is on the market for $40 million.
Sold.
You bought it?
It's sold.
Oh, somebody's bought it. Do we know who? But what's wonderful about it is in 1951, he designs this house for himself with a butterfly roof. And in 1952, we get a butterfly roof on the elementary school in Morro Bay. So, I mean, what better bones than you can have there? And I think I have a picture of a butterfly roof a bit later on. The first butterfly roof was designed by the Swiss architect Le Corbusier, the founder of modernism, for a house in Chile that was never built in 1930. And it basically reverses the attic roof, which you don't need if you don't need an attic. And so it has this wonderful upswept embracing of the sky. And so it was good enough for his house, and it was good enough for the Morro Bay School the next year. Okay, next slide. Thank you. This is the inside. So you see the butterflies going in both directions. And next slide. So here are a few slides of a school that he designed at Atwater. He was a very innovative person in terms of geometrical design, and he decided suddenly that hexagons were the right design for schools, and you could kind of fit them together, and you could carve good spaces out of them. And so this was a hexagonal school he designed, I think, in 1957. And next slide, we've got a few slides just to give you a impression. The same thing. I mean, it's very space age looking. It's really delightful. But why not go to a space age school? And then the next slide. And it's still there, by the way, it's still in use. And then he had the idea that all these hexagons would be fit together under a giant hexagon. And so this is a 1959 article he wrote for a national publication on innovation in schools. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see how this works. Oh, no, you won't see how this works. Well, here's another sort of wonderful roof design he did for the Howard Johnson's opposite Disneyland. And that's just sort of a fun 1960s thing. And let's see what surprises the next slide holds. And this is his last period. Architecture tends to be very local. So when he was in Long Beach, he designed the hell out of Long Beach. He had all these wonderful designs in Long Beach. Then he vanishes for 10 years in this very curious way. I almost wonder if one of his buildings didn't fall down or there was some scandal, because from the age of 19 to about 25, he's all over the newspapers in Long Beach and San Pedro, and then suddenly vanishes. And then he turns up as an architect in Seattle. And then when he finally comes back to California 10 years later, 1936, he qualifies as an actual architect, not an architectural designer. And he immediately starts designing schools, and that becomes his specialty. Moves up, first he's in Bakersfield, designs a lot in this area. Then he moves to Carmel, and finally he retires. Oh, then to LA, finally retires in Hawaii. So this is Haiku Gardens, which is a condominium project, which was his last recorded design. And you can see how much it takes advantage of trying to bring light into the building, into the condominiums, and trying to create these wonderful spaces for air to enjoy the Hawaiian climate. And now let's leap forward or backwards to Louis Noiret Crawford. Here is our late bloomer. He was born in Kentucky, grew up in Indiana, and there's a gap in his youth, which I can't find any information on, but at the age of 27, he graduates with an actual architecture degree from the University of Illinois, comes out to Berkeley and marries a woman in Berkeley, Winifred. They go down, Winifred Kittredge, and they go down to Lompoc. He becomes a high school teacher in Lompoc, manual arts, and also a athletic coach. But within 2 years, he designs his first building. And what's so interesting, his mother was a school teacher, his wife is a school teacher, he was a school teacher, and his main business is designing schools. And if you see this place, he's a great school designer. He really has this sense, much like Julia Morgan, that you're in one of his rooms and it's just very comfortable. It has air, it has light, it has a certain amount of grandeur, it has a human scale. It has interesting things. It has truss work that you can flick peas up to. I mean, there's an understanding of kids and of teachers and how to make them comfortable. I have to confess, I just finished a book on San Luis Obispo architecture, and the frontispiece is the urinal at the Madonna Inn. And I have to say, had I seen the urinals here, they would be the frontispiece. They're gorgeous. I mean, it's just that detail work. And Morgan was the same way. It was that detail work. So he, like Morgan, worked in historic revival styles. A lot of it Spanish, mostly Spanish, but many others. So let's move on, galloping on to the next slide. Here is the banner headline announcing his death. So big deal for Santa Maria. Next headline. Or next slide, rather. This is the first project he did in San Luis Obispo County. It's the Pismo School. And one of the things I wanted to do here was to show buildings that, I mean, a lot of his buildings have been torn down. Some have been abandoned. One, it's the Del Mar View, I think it was called. And it was on land donated by the Hollister family. And when they built a Chevron plant next to it, they said, oh, the kids can't go here anymore. Chevron paid to have a new school built elsewhere. The land reverted to the Hollisters. And now there's this gorgeous school that just sits in the middle of nowhere, in essence. It's abandoned. The Hollisters have no use for it. They could store their T-shirts in it.
That's in Gaviota, right?
Sorry?
Gaviota?
In that area, yeah. Any rate, so Pismo School built 1922. His first project was 1919, so this is a very early project for him. Next slide. And that is a style that is a really Umbrian style, a Northern Italian style. Here is a building that still has his bones. And what I love about this is from the late 20s, is an Art Deco style building. Art Deco was not streamlined, it was intended to be classical. And the name comes from the exhibition of Art Décoratif in Paris. They had a big exhibition, very influential around the world. And this was the Matthews building at Higuera and Moro, I think, in San Luis Obispo. And if you look at those columns, really flat pilasters, you'll see exactly the same pattern out in the hallway, where we have those wonderful silhouettes. Okay, next slide. Let's rattle on before my sugar wears off. And yours does too. And here you see his drawing for it. And an odd little detail is whoever was drawing this misspelled Lewis up at the top right-hand corner as L-U-I-S. It must have been a Freudian slip since it was in San Luis Obispo. Kind of the sad thing about that building is that they have stripped off a lot of detail, thinking that that makes it better rather than worse. But it's a gorgeous Art Deco building. And next slide. And here is the Goleta Valley, unless I'm misreading, or Union High School. And the reason this is in here is both it's a wonderful mid-20s Lewis Crawford building, but also it was so beloved by the community that when the school district closed it down in 1976, the county acquired, there was a big uproar and the county acquired the building and they turned it into a community center. And then eventually the city acquired the building. So it's had this long history of as a community center. And I think we have a few pictures of the wonderful spaces. If we go on to the next slide. Oh no, that's an older, so this is a lovely picture of people doing the renovations, because in those days you were allowed to do the renovations and people didn't think, oh, that guy's about to fall off the roof and sue us. But communities got together to restore buildings that were important to them and that gave their community a sense of centering. And the next slide, and just this, again, Crawford is wonderful at designing spaces that you want to be in. Look at that, the courtyard of the school is wonderful. Windows, huge windows as like we have here, but they retained fortunately their the muntins, the fenestration. Next slide, let's move on. And there's an early picture of it. These are not necessarily in precisely the right order. Next slide. And now we get local, San Luis Obispo High School. A gorgeous building that is no longer here, on a gorgeous site that now is occupied by something else. But you see his sense of grandeur, his sense of giving the community a real feeling of importance. I mean, imagine, and the wonderful central cathedral window there into the lobby they used to decorate every Christmas. I mean, it's a full focal point for the community. But let's move on to the next slide. Here is the Pythian Castle. This is a 1930 building that still exists, fortunately. Look at all that wonderful cast iron work on it, or wrought iron work, sorry, balconies and so on. Hasn't been much changed. And the next slide, he was very much an organization man, a member of the Knights of Pythias, etc. This is a blueprint of the Bliss House. And I understand someone here knew the Blisses, the Reverend Leon Bliss and his wife, Belle. It's a wonderful house up on Kern Avenue in Morro Heights. And here is the weather vane. There is the telephone niche, the niches for the books. Again, his wonderful sense of detail.
This is, I think it's 350 or 350 Kern, maybe. If you're going south on Kern and you cross Ridgeway and you start dropping downhill on the left-hand side, about 5 houses down, it's just beautiful Spanish. And if you look on top of that house, on top of the garage, that weather vane that you see right there is still there. It's a beautiful house. It's one of the nicest houses in Morro Bay.
Yeah, and one of the things so that's a 1930 house that's 5-6 years before this building. So he's already established a connection here and has opened a office in San Luis Obispo as well. And the thing about houses is it varies, but people often love their houses, they hold on to them. And one of the problems with schools are always built or used to be built as a way to show off the community. I mean, there were these wonderful old schools in San Luis Obispo, no matter how tiny the village, they would show it all off on the school. And now I think not so much. Some of the schools I grew up in that were designed like prisons with no windows, not happy memories. But there is a sense, unfortunately, that schools, will have a shelf life of about 20 years, and then we need to modernize it. We need to modernize it. Crawford designed 3 schools at the same time on PWA money: Morro Bay, Cambria, and Cayucas. Extraordinarily, all 3 of those still exist. And so we still have the benefit of his wonderful skills as an architect. Let's finish up. Next slide. There is the house we're talking about. Wonderful hilltop location and all this wonderful detail, and it's amazing. And the next one, this is a building in the Laird House. It's master listed in San Luis Obispo, another Crawford design from 31. And next slide. So he did also, this is a Normandy revival style. He didn't just do Spanish. Amazing house again, but look at those windows and look at our windows. There's a sense in which a school allows everyone to be rich because everybody goes here and everybody can experience the kind of interior that only very wealthy people like Mr. Laird could afford in their private houses. And I think that's an important aspect of public buildings. Next slide. And here is probably his masterpiece, the Santa Maria City Hall. And that was a PWA project, one of the earliest ones. And it's 1934 it was completed, and it's still very much in its original condition. And let's go through the next 2 pictures as well, which are color pictures of the same hall. I'm sorry that you have to do all this adjusting. But you can see the wonderful tile work. I mean, that's very much a Julia Morgan touch. You can see him borrowing from Morgan. And he also traveled to Spain because he wanted to get the actual experience. And when he came back from Spain, he went and lectured at the Minerva Club, which if anyone who knows Santa Maria, that is a Julia Morgan designed women's club down there. And the next slide.
This building also had that same tile, but it was taken off a number of years ago.
Yeah.
And this building's still there, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, the Santa Maria City Hall is still very much in use. He did expansions on it. And he also did a Santa Maria library, which I think has been torn down. At least I haven't been able to find it. But what was said of the Santa Maria library, it was he had been trying to create a civic center. So he'd been trying to create a lot of buildings that would join together and give Santa Maria a real heart where people could go and have a sense of their city. And that was his last piece. And it was done, sadly, after he had been felled by a stroke. And the last 6 years of his life, 7 years of his life, he couldn't leave the house. He was at the height of his career. He was 49. He was about to become president of the California State Architects Association. And then he never left his house again. Next slide. I have no idea what it is, but it will be something exciting. Oh, there's the San Luis Obispo High School Gymnasium. That's also on our master list. So two of the three known buildings in San Luis Obispo by Crawford are on the master list, our highest designation. And next one, that has been restored but remains in use. There's the Cayucos School, and next one is the Cambria School in a Gothic revival style, a little bit of that you see in the Gothic arch. And the next slide is a wonderful, and we're going to go back in time because this is what it looks like now. It's a family and youth center in Santa Maria, but it was built as the Santa Maria Gas Company building. And next slide, this really gives you a sense of Art Deco, which is a very vertical style, very classical. Look at all the striations on those pilasters and so on. I mean, it looks like the Metropolitan Opera. It looks right out of a 1930s movie. And then the next one is, I think, our earliest photograph of it that appeared in the paper. It's very interesting that when people restore buildings, sometimes they want to put a lot of different colors on them because they think that will make it more exciting. Sometimes they strip all the detail off because they think that will be more acceptable. And let's go on to next slide. Here is that first butterfly roof of the Corbusier. And again, in a place where you don't have to worry about it raining so much. Next slide. The reason I have this slide, this is the first Renaissance building, or certainly the first Renaissance church. It's by an architect named Brunelleschi. It's in Florence. It's from the 14th century. Sorry, yes, the 15th century, I'm sorry. And what he was trying to do was take a peaked church roof, and you can see the same thing with Wynkoop. He wants to, let's make a butterfly out of a peaked roof. Let's do something different. I hope doing this doesn't confuse people in television land, but in Zoom land. So what he does is he creates what's known as an attic panel. He raises the separate panel and gives it a pediment to make it look like a classical building, you know, from the Roman period. And now, next slide, you've got one in Morro Bay. And it's, you know, if you come to the freeway in Morro Bay, it used to be a big deal for communities in California to, you know, to put up a big sign that said, you know, San Luis Obispo, Morro Bay, whatever, give you a sense of entrance. And now, of course, Caltrans does that. There's a green reflective sign that says, you know, turn off here for Morro Bay. But I bicycled here last week. And after getting a flat tire outside of Cuesta College and then falling off because I hadn't put my bike back together properly and suddenly it turned and I didn't.
Oh, no.
This is the, you know, I come in and this is the first building that catches my attention because what does it have? It has an attic panel and then it has this wonderful, you know, people think of this as a kind of a false front design. It then has this wonderful arched pediment and it takes you right back to Brunelleschi, you know, 600 years ago. Whoever designed that was designing a Renaissance building. And so if you listen to what buildings are saying, they become much more exciting. And the fact, one of the things I love about Morro Bay is the plants and the buildings together, and I love this wonderful palm tree backdrop. So next slide, and then I think we are almost finished with my peroration. Again, this is the first building that I was focused on in Morro Bay. I claim that this is the architect of this, William Gladstone Merchant, was his first job was working for Bernard Maybeck building the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco.
Really?
Raise your hand if you've been to the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco. This is wonderful. It was for the Panama Pacific Exposition 1915. It sits next to the water. It was so beloved. It was made out of plaster intended to fall apart in a year, but it was so beloved that after the fair, San Francisco insisted they keep it. Merchant restored it, and he was restoring it for a second time just before he died. And he essentially went into the business for the rest of his life of building temples. He built temples for the Treasure Island World's Fair. If you look at any of his buildings in San Francisco, they're done on temple designs. The Mission substation of PG&E in San Francisco was recently restored to all of its glory. And it's a Greek temple, but of a very modernistic touch. And I claim that this was modeled on the Temple of Luxor, because originally he had two stacks that resembled the two obelisks, and then you have the forecourt, and then you have the sanctuary in back, but all covered with this wonderful glowing aluminum. Don't let me get too excited. I'm moving on. But I just love this building. There's the substation in its original conception. It's a recent restoration. Just a gorgeous building to come upon in San Francisco, in a not very prepossessing area of San Francisco. And next slide. I'm said to Eric, I'm always bad at having too many slides. Our wonderful butterfly roof in Morro Bay, right over here by Frank Wingcoop. And next, we may be. Oh, no, you've seen all of these. So I think let's trail through the end. I think this ended with just some of the wonderful pictures. Those of you at home can enjoy these. Those of you who are here have just wandered through all of these wonderful spaces. And is that it? No, another. I love this because that was the two buildings together. And here you have this wonderful sense of grandeur, but also human scale for the children. And for the community that you get from Lewis Crawford. So let's end with that. And anyone who has any questions, I'm happy to answer. And if you want to raise your hand and say, that's enough from you, shut up. You can say that too, because I get too excited. I love these buildings.
Well, James, thank you so very much. Your ability to make this about Morro Bay is really valuable to all of us.
It's just a reminder that it's Morro Bay. I mean, it's, from having been here,
but it's nice to hear it.
There's a loss, it's just when you lose an important building. And this is one of the ironies. We do have a system, and I'm a bureaucrat in many ways, because I work with a complex legal bureaucracy about what's important and what's not technically not important. And the odd thing is, our preservation is based on buildings, but it's really often what happened in the buildings, which is much more important to us. I mean, people never cease to talk to me about Scrubby and Lloyd's hamburgers, or in San Luis Obispo, or which is before my time, or Riley's department store. It means what happened in buildings means something, but the buildings provide that frame for that canvas where things took place and where things in the future will take place, that have that wonderful sense of historic meaning that something new doesn't have.
I love it. We do want to watch everybody's time, so we have one more speaker that we're going to go through, and that's pre-recorded, and that's about 12 minutes. And we'll be done with that. Then I'd like to go to public comment. Anybody who would like to add to it, and we can take questions then, James, if that's okay with you. And I really would like to kind of keep us going. So if we could go, you can stay here if you'd like.
I'll stay here.
Thanks. And And,
Not having to vote.
and I'd like to go next to, and if we can roll this one, Corey and Ray, we have did you want to introduce this, Joe? Did you want to say anything about Glenn Soloway?
It's a pleasure to introduce Glenn Silloway. Although there's probably a certain irony in that most of the people who are here or watching the show probably know Glenn. I have no doubt that he's involved in many more organizations than I know about, but I know that he's the president of the Morro Bay Historical Society. He's chairman of the Morro Bay Open Space Alliance. I know that he does a lot of leadership work for the Women's League of San Luis Obispo. He's an engaged citizen of Morro Bay. He's an activist in the best sense of the word.
Can we go ahead and roll that interview? Thank you, guys.
So I think we're now recording. Is everybody good?
Mhm. Yeah.
So let me do a quick introduction. I'm the chair of the Morro Bay Planning Commission, and I'm here with Planning Commissioner Joe Ingraffia, and we're doing a pre-recorded interview of one of our local heroes, Glenn Silloway. And the reason is because of his leadership around the Historic Society of Morro Bay and his leadership in Morro Bay in general. But the Historic Society has played a major role around preservation, of course, in Morro Bay, and has led to an awareness of a possible preservation ordinance that we're interested in pursuing here at the Commission, and that the Council has also endorsed. The other thing is that I'd be remiss not to introduce Glenn's wife, Marlis McPherson, who it was Glenn and Marlis that first told me about the elementary school site. He was the first that I heard from about its importance to Morro Bay and preservation effort. So with that, I'd like to, I think, ask my first question of Glenn and hear what he has to say. But could you tell us, Glenn, a little bit about the history of the Historic Society of Morro Bay?
Historical Society of Morro Bay has been around since 1993. So this is our 30th anniversary year. And we're a small but doughty group of people who are amateur historians and committed to Morro Bay. We have a board of 8, I think, now. And you'll hear about some of them when we talk about the ordinance, because we have a great group, really amazing group of people who help us do this stuff. So our focus is on education and collections of items that are historically relevant. We try to do good history. One of our signature efforts is the hidden history panels that you may run across, mostly on the Embarcadero right now, but we have some more coming up that'll be in town. And their point is to tease people with pieces of our history that are underfoot, but you may not know that it's there because you haven't been told. And now we're going to give some of those stories air, and hopefully encourage people to learn more about the city, to take it seriously, and to enjoy it. So that's our job.
Love that start. Joe, do you have a question for Glenn?
Well, I'm a long-time history buff, and
Yeah,
I love the fact that I'm living here in Morro Bay, and you can participate and sort of feel the history around you. Beyond that, no, I can't think of anything else.
Well, why don't we talk a little bit about the work that the Historical Society did in preparation for the preservation ordinance?
Yeah.
Glenn, could you give us a map of that?
Yeah. Back in 2018, in the dark ages, the general plan update was in process, and part of it was to set up a historic resources and cultural resources strategy to get the city to be more conscious about its history and what we need to preserve about it. And in that discussion, the Historical Society was mentioned as a possible community partner. The documents said that one of the first things we have to do is become a certified local government. And in order to do that, you have to have a historic preservation ordinance. So our board kind of jumped in, not knowing what we were getting ourselves into. That's always good news. But we started a process to develop a draft to kind of jumpstart it so the city wouldn't have this huge mountain in front of it that it couldn't, to get us going. So that's how we got started on it.
And what was the year again, Glenn?
The general plan update that we went from was 2018, and we really convened our group in the early 2019 and worked that whole year. It took a long time to put this together.
Fantastic. And who were some of the folks involved?
Oh, great. Thanks for asking. That's a great team. We had 10 or 11 people all together, but I wrote them down, so I didn't want to forget. I had 6 people who really, we're meeting every month. Michael Lewis, who was a former planning commissioner and Cal Poly prof, you probably know him already. Kathy Novak, Jeremiah O'Brien, Ron Reisner, and then Joan Solu, who's a member of our Historic Society board and really worked hard on this, putting together draft materials, and then me. We were the ones who were at almost every meeting, and for that year. So.
Fantastic. And if you had expectations around the ordinance, what are you thinking?
The thing the personal thing and the historical thing that we talk about in terms of the ordinance is we watch these buildings slipping away from us. And you've talked about it at the Planning Commission about the Little Red House. And there are other options. One we may talk about here in a little bit is the old elementary school. We don't have a lot of gems, but we have some. And our need for this historic preservation ordinance is to give us a channel for identifying those buildings, putting some kind of interest in preserving them, and then to participate through the kind of legal structure so that we can provide incentives to private property owners who want to participate. And that's the way we're trying to structure the ordinance, our draft.
I love it. And, this is pre-recorded, but, everybody's watching this as we're sitting in the auditorium of the elementary school.
Yeah, let's do that.
After, you introduced the idea to me, and I've really heard the same enthusiasm from a number of, long-term Morro Bay residents, a lot who actually went to school there. I think didn't Joan actually go to school at the elementary school?
Joan has been so deeply involved in the school district that I would be surprised if she hadn't had something to do with it. But they finally closed that school. I think it was 2001 was the last class year, or the year before that. So her boys may have been too young to actually go there. I'm not quite sure.
Okay. But a lot of folks have. So it's sort of exciting to see the opportunity there. Joe, let's talk a little bit about the elementary school site. You and I have toured it. It's stunning. Everybody who's here watching, and even those people that are watching on Zoom live, the auditorium is fantastic. The historic building is really in a very good shape with lots of historic detail. Joe, do you have any comments about or questions for Glenn?
Well, certainly comments. Recently was the first occasion I had to actually go inside the school and take a look around. I'd always been impressed by the exterior, and that theater or general meeting room with the exposed timbers on the ceiling and the wonderful mural on the back wall was just something really significant.
Yeah.
I was impressed by all the classrooms in the other building and that nice, seemingly northern exposure lighting. Just wonderful. And likewise, I've been surprised by the number of people that I've talked to who have either been students at the school or were the parents of students who've gone to the school. I mean, it just sort of stands out as, something worthwhile of efforts to preserve it. It'd be it's a gem that we shouldn't lose. I was wondering, in terms of the preservation ordinance, I imagine you looked at, prototypes and kind of ordinances that would affect in other small cities, probably on the coast. Have they been, reasonably successful in, achieving what they wanted to achieve?
That's a really good question, Joe. And we did more work comparing the various ordinances than we did investigating how well they worked. So I can't answer your question.
Okay, I understand.
Some of them have been around quite a long time. If you look at the one in Slow City, which is one of the ordinances we modeled ours on, they have had a tremendously well-organized historic preservation project across time. And it's shown up in districts that they've identified, and within those districts, they have specific buildings and houses. So I would say that in Slow, it is working well. And so that's one of the reasons we wanted to use them as a model, because they're close. We can talk to them. We did talk to them, and it seems to be a good for them.
Oh, well, that's excellent for the future.
Yeah.
And Glenn, are there other standout ordinances that you looked at, local ordinances?
We looked at so many that we took bits and pieces from them, but the Slow City one, the one from Laverne, which is based on a voluntary participation model, and the big city one we looked at a lot was the LA conservation model ordinance, because it's so well done. It's long, but it really is clearly written, and so it helped us. We adapted portions of that as well.
Very nice to hear. I guess one other thing I did want to ask is when you were talking about the elementary school campus, I love the way you talked about its importance for history and preservation, but you also talked about its importance as a piece of, Morro Bay, a center for Morro Bay, even a possible, civic campus. Would you want to talk about that a little bit?
So people know that building, or most people know about it, but the main building there was started in 1936. They actually broke ground. The funding was a bond measure passed by our local citizens for more than half, and then the supplemental funds were from the WPA. In the middle of the Depression, this community voted to impose taxes on themselves to build a school. And I'm always kind of blown away by that generosity. And it coupled with some of the land was, much of the land, it's a parcel that's total, I think about 8.5 or 9 acres, was donated by people. A member of the Quintana family, which has been very prominent here, but gave about over 5 acres of it. So it's always been a community center for us, and it was a community product of cooperation during a time when things were pretty bleak. On top of it, the architect, a guy named Lewis Crawford, he's locally important because he's built similar buildings, one in Slow High School, the city hall in Santa Maria is his most famous one probably, but you can see the Spanish revival style that he uses was prominent, but he just very good at it. So you have this wonderful building. And the auditorium that you mentioned, by the way, some people have asked me, well, do you think that Julia Morgan actually designed that? And the reason is that the auditorium at the Bunday Club in Slow, if you ever get to go see it, it's very similar in proportions and decoration and so forth. I think the high school or our school here is larger, but it's remarkably well done. So we want to preserve that building, and I will plug in for those mid-century modern classrooms as well. Architect named Frank Wincoop, who was quite well known locally, and he did some nice buildings. Those have been going away. They used to be common in California. There are not many left, and these are good examples of it. So I would love to save those. I don't know if anybody's seen the inside of those classrooms. They're spacious, they're lighted, they're wonderfully adaptable. they're going to take some work to bring them back. We need some money, but you know, we have a goal there. So I'd love to save them.
Well, as an architect, I love that you mentioned those buildings. I think they're stunning too. And, you know, Joe might have a word or two to say about them. We did get inside a couple of them to take a look. They're still being actively used as classrooms and such. But it's the architecture, it's the siting, it's the north light. What do you think, Joe?
You know, it reminds me of what the classrooms were in my elementary school, which was built in the early 40s. I'm fond of it for that reason. But to me, I mean, it wouldn't take much to imagine them as artist studios and yoga studios and, you know, artistic environments of one sort or another. And I, you know, the architecture of the main building, the exterior, is you know, pretty imposing, and where it's located, it just cries out as to be, you know, kind of a civic center, as opposed to where the civic center is located now. And I think it looks like a community center, or it could look like a community center. And
Yeah.
I very much support that.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, Joe. And you know, when the San Luis Coastal Unified School District was planning to put some housing on that at one point a few years ago, excuse me, they backed off on that idea now. But at the time, the only building that they planned to save was the front part, the oldest part of that first elementary school. The mid-century moderns were gone. The addition to the first building was gone. And I can kind of understand why they're trying to preserve that, because not save the rest of the buildings. They want the space for housing. Competing valuable goals there. But when I think about that main building with the addition off the back, I could see running the entire city through there, from every function, including maybe even the police department on one end where there's a parking lot and access to the highways. It's well, it'd be a marvelous place for a public campus. I think it could be a center for our city of activity as well as just function.
And the property is so large, you know, that it can accommodate so many different kinds of uses. So, you know, to say that it's a civic center doesn't mean that it's at the exclusion of housing or commercial development either. There's enough to accommodate all of it.
Or even maintaining the athletic fields. I think those options are there. And just, you know, to let Glenn know in advance that, you know, as we're sitting here in the actual hearing, Commissioner Eric Meyer, who went to school here, conducted tours before the meeting, Glenn, and, you know, offered anybody who wanted to walk through the building with him to kind of hear and see what it is. And the other update is Scott Graham, our staff around planning, and has been actively talking to the school district to keep the city as part of a dialogue about what the campus might, how it can progress.
Yeah, good. All good. Those are all good things. I envy the people who get to walk around with Eric.
I'm saying this in advance. He's smiling as you said.
I know.
Well, this is good, Glenn. Some final encouragement. You know, I mean, you know, you're shining in terms of your long-term commitment to history and preservation here in Morro Bay. Your words show that long-term commitment and your leadership. Any final encouragements?
I am encouraged I've heard people talking recently about wanting to preserve various aspects of Morro Bay. Has become a public discussion. And I'm very happy to hear that. There is support out there for preserving our old buildings. And the elementary school certainly generated a ton of support when there was a possibility of losing it all. People didn't like that idea, and for good reason. So I'm encouraged. You know, the informal motto of the Historical Society is preservation and progress. Now you have to square that circle. We want both, but we need to start by preserving the key elements of our history, or we will forget it.
Love it. Joe, final word.
You know, much the same thing. You know, we are in this place, you know, well into the 21st century. And I think I'd be surprised if anybody is opposed to the notion of historical preservation. Now, of course, everything comes down to the specifics, and some people may want something more preserved than another, or perhaps not on a particular occasion, but nobody can really object to the concept. And likewise, I think the appeal of the school is so universal. I'm not anticipating, very much opposition, if any at all.
Glenn, a big thank you. And I know you wanted to be here on July 5th with us. And I know that you were going to be out of town, but a big thank you to you, not for just doing this recording, but for all you've been able to do for us here in Morro Bay.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Likewise, thanks, Glenn.
Appreciate the time.
Bye, you guys.
Thank you all for listening. We're going to wrap it up now with public comment, but first I'd like to introduce the council members that are here, if that's okay. If I could start, Carla, is Mayor Wixom here? Hi, Carla. Let's see, we've got Jen Ford, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you. Laurel Barton. Thank you so much, Commissioner, or I'm council member. And Zara. No, Zara left. I think we lost Zara. Cindy Edwards, council member. Thank you guys for being here very much. Quickly, I was gonna, if I could, just introduce our historic panelists who have been here. If you're okay, could you either stand or wave when I call your name? Bill Martini, Jeff Odell, Marlene Owens, Michael Woody. Is Michael still here? Oh, he just left. Tony Woody, did Tony go? Yeah. Gail Queen, Nancy Bast, Dorothy Cutter just left. She was here. Roger Castle, I think, who was going to be viewing from home. Roger, thank you. And Joe Dunlap, who is hopefully viewing from Oregon. He was, they were all helpful to us. And a big thanks to James Papp. With that, I'd like to open public comment. And I'd really love to hear from any of our presenters, our history panelists, or anybody else who would like to comment. Welcome, Bill.
One thing I think. Are you okay now? Good. Yeah, it was excellent. This is actually my first time in this building and in these surroundings. So impressive. My wife went to school here, and so I've heard some of the tales, like Eric, wondering if there's another way up to the bell tower besides climbing a ladder on the outside. I heard there might be.
That seems to be the big question.
Yeah. One thing that I heard comments earlier, and I think everyone is thinking, as opposed to this being another development, all these buildings coming down, I mean, that would be tragic. I heard, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, that when the Quintana family either donated or sold the property, that there was a stipulation that if the school was no longer here, they got the property back. So that might be a
You're
caveat.
suggesting a deed restriction.
A deed restricted, yeah, exactly, that had to be used for a school, or that was it. So that might be a preservation part of this property to keep in mind. As a community center, I mean, it doesn't come any better. You know, you get the history, you got the room, you're not so squeezed in. I've been talking as far as the harbor office, you know, they're wedged in, and the down, you know, I mean, as far as the regular buildings, I mean, to move City Hall and that here, and even the auditorium, I mean, it's just multifaceted. So without rambling on, I think this was really excellent to bring this to the public and all get behind what could be done with this entire location. Thank you.
Thanks for the comments, Bill. Thanks for being here. Scott, do we have any idea on a deed restriction for this property?
I have heard that on more than one occasion, but have not actually seen documentation to support that.
How could we look into that?
we'd have to look into the title on the property.
I think
Yes.
that might be
Presu-
worth discussing in the future. Yeah,
I would presume that it would have to be something recorded against it.
yeah. Thank you. Others who would like to say a few words, please. Tell us your name and
Judy Setting, and I want to answer Bill's question. So the second stairway to the bell tower is located in the, you guys might call it a dungeon, but I call it a bomb shelter because when we had school drills, we would take the kids and line up. There's a concrete hall that goes all the way parallel with our big hall right here. It's underneath. And so when you go in the door off of the hall right here, I believe it's right to the left. There's a stairway that goes up. There's a plywood blocking it now, but it goes into the bell tower and it's a nice place to be.
I love it.
And I just wanted to say also that in 1995, a wonderful teacher, Guy Crabb, tutelaged his students in researching the history of how this building came to be. And we had with field trips to Cal Poly and, what do you call the little things where you look up the newspaper articles, the microfiche. Yes. The kids, the fourth graders did all that and put together a really nice report that they presented to the school body. And it was meant to lead the way towards, trying to get this to be a historical, I don't have the wording, recognized by the state as a historical
Yeah.
place
A
so that it could
registered
be
historic
preserved.
property, yeah.
So I know that we could talk with Guy Crabb about that. He has lots of paperwork on it. Thank you.
Very nice. Thank you for being here. Anybody else who'd like to talk or any quick stories on the school?
Hi, Linda Donnelly. My husband and I, we raised two boys at this school. My oldest began kindergarten in 1987. I believe his teacher was Mrs. Kelly, and the other one was Mrs. Dumas. I was a room mom all 7 years of both of their years here. Served on the PTA with Mayor Wixom, probably Judy Setting, I'm not sure. And so I was a room mom, a cafeteria aide, and a yard duty. So if I'd have seen that you flipping peas, I would have probably put you in timeout.
It's not too late. Yeah.
So what has me up here is I'd like to know, I was told that the building is zoned for housing or something like this. I've been talking with Angela Hendy McKee, and that would need to be changed if we're going to preserve this area. And also, what does the school district have in mind at the moment? Because I guess we shut them down or paused them for a while because the community was so outraged about their concept of what they have planned or had planned for the turf and so forth. And then has the city considered buying this property if we're going to, preserve it or whatever we plan to do? And Mr. Crabb was my youngest son's fourth grade teacher. So he did a lot of groundwork on trying to preserve Moore Elementary and trying to get it in a designation as a historic site. So I would encourage you to look him up and chat with him. I think he's even written a book or two about it. Maybe I'm wrong, but he does have documents that he sent me about the deeds. And I'm sure we can go to the county clerk's office and look those deeds up. So thank you.
Linda, thank you. Scott, any response to the zoning issue?
It does have a residential designation on it. It can remain as it is, though. It doesn't have to be changed. It could be changed if, that was the desire of the community. We have been in, conversations with the school district, Superintendent Prater. They have a pretty open mind to what could happen here. It's nothing set in stone at this point based on the conversations we've had with them. including discussions that centered on a civic center. Myself and Rick Carpenter, our interim city manager, met with them back in May, and that's kind of what they expressed to us is, you know, they're open to talking with the community. So that's kind of where it sits.
So we can, the commission could ask you for progress reports and we could kind of get a feeling for where that might go. I think there really is substantial community interest,
I think clearly.
and James Papp likes it too.
And I will
Anyone else?
just add that I don't
Sorry.
love everything. I mean, I'm in the business of historic preservation, and that means that you have to make choices. You always have to make choices. There's not an infinite amount of money, and there's not an infinite amount of political will. So we've set up systems by which you decide whether a building is significant, whether it's not significant, and the standards are not, you know, pea flicking. That is, it's not personal feeling. It's things like, did a historic event take place in somewhere? Is it, does it embody a particular style of architecture? Are the architects who built it master architects? So there are all kinds of things, and everybody loves historic preservation until they don't. That is, there's always some trade-off. And, you know, and it will get probably sticky, and words will be said that cannot be unsaid. But if I were to weigh in, you obviously have two noted master architects who worked on the two parts, and they obviously both embody a particular style of architecture. They would qualify for the National Register, for the California Register. The National and California Registers are National and California Registers of buildings that are locally important. So that doesn't mean that they have to be nationally important. It just means that they are National Registers of what's locally significant. And so you have regionally significant architects involved in them. Then you have a different thing called National or California Landmarks, which are things of national or California significance. And for instance, and somebody else has said this, so I don't have to, the Morro Bay Power Plant as the first industrial desalinization plant would have a national significance. That could be a national landmark. But this would not be a national landmark or a California landmark, but it would certainly be of local significance on the National Register of Historic Places for embodying a style of architecture and for being the work of two master architects. Okay, I'll shut up.
Thank you, James. Anybody else before we close the public hearing? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jeff Odell. I raised two sons that both attended this school, you know, through their entire careers. Also, I had a half brother who's several years previous attended this school. We've covered the architectural importance of the building, but I'd just like to mention the green space. It's the only impromptu soccer pitch on this end of town. It's the only place in the center of Morro Bay that you can fly a kite. My half brother and my two sons and a whole bunch of other kids in my neighborhood, it's the safest place in the world to teach a kid how to ride a two-wheeled bike. So you can crash on grass. You have to pedal real hard too. And I don't know, it's just important. It's always been here. It's always been a focus. Before the community center was built, there used to be 2 baseball diamonds there. Used to be softball games. And I mean, it was just the neighborhood use on this side of town. You didn't have to go and reserve a soccer pitch or a baseball diamond out at the Lila Kaiser Park. And I just think it's location proximity. It's the only thing in this part of town that is what it is, a great, beautiful open lawn and an informal space where you can picnic or, you know, do whatever you want and roll around in the grass.
Jeff, thanks.
Thank you.
And thanks for being here again. We are at 7:30 and I'd like to get everybody home. Okay,
I just want to pitch
please.
in and reinforce what Jeff just said, what an important spot this is for the entire community for recreation, among other things. But the recreation is incredibly important. And as a former soccer player and somebody whose family loves soccer and has played here for decades. I don't know how, it's irreplaceable, truly. And it's a place of inclusivity because the Hispanic community plays with all the non-Hispanics, and it's a wonderful experience to have and to share with people. It really brings people together. So I hope you put a lot of weight on just that aspect of it, notwithstanding the incredibility of this building. But thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, yeah. We will make time, yes. Take your time.
Didn't used to. The Owens family has many memories here. I think I know from years ago, but I can remember playing softball out on that field when I first came in 1970. I was the shortstop. Bev Dillard was the catcher, and she broke her finger. But my kids all went to school here. My oldest daughter, who came here in 4th grade, and I can see her sitting there, right there. And she played the glockenspiel, and she played the flute, and she played the piccolo, and now she plays the bells. And thank you, Mr. Coricelli. That is a memory, and I can see it. I can see my son Michael, my son David, who owns the dry cleaners here in town, the family business. I owned it before him and my dad before me. And I can see him coming in and he says, "Mom, I think I broke my arm. We were playing touch football." Touch football. Troy League hit him. He touched him. You maybe remember these things. You might. My other son, Michael, I can see him up there and he's sitting right there, and he was a Christmas tree that year at Christmas. And he ran across that stage and he did not do well. He is now in his 20th year.
He didn't do well as a Christmas tree.
No, not too well. But he was fun to watch. You damn. But he is now in his 20th year teaching history at Woodland High School. So this is the history of the people that went here, and I can hear them, see them. The building talks to me. I'm sure it tells a lot of stories.
Marlene, thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, I can remember teaching 5th grade in that one of those rooms right now, by the way, with Mary Lou Erickson. There for about 5, 6 years, maybe.
Oh, thank you.
I could have been a tall Christmas tree. Okay, James will probably know this. I'm from Atlanta. In 1970, they wanted to tear down the Fox Theater that's half Moorish architecture, half Egyptian. It is the center, the mecca of everything in Atlanta now. Bell South was going to tear it down and put a parking lot in. And we did Save the Fox. And we're going to save this building. I'm putting it out as an intention for Morro Bay. Like, we saved the Fox, we're going to save these 5 acres.
Thanks, everybody, so very, very much. Commissioners, I'm going to close the public hearing. And, sorry, thank you. Let's see, do we have Corey or Ray? Do we have anybody in the queue with a hand raised? Okay, so with that, the public hearing is closed. And thank you all very, very much. I think this was great. I'm still fatigued from July 4th and the holidays, so I'm sure you all are too. Commissioners, can we make it brief?
Yeah, I just want to introduce Asia King back to our meeting because we haven't had her since she had her baby.
Thank you.
But Asia, could you tell us about our book club and what our first book was? Because I'd like to introduce our second book and how this is relevant, by the way, to everything we're talking about. So Asia, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. As planning commissioners, we had an extracurricular activity of starting a bit of a book club, and the public is always invited to read along with us. Very informal, but the first book we read in May was called Architect Verb. And so it talked about all the different I guess, agendas that are put on architecture and how architecture impacts place. And yeah, I haven't had a chance to discuss that book with other commissioners. I've been out of commission myself for a couple weeks, and so maybe Mike can talk about where that's been going.
Yep. Yeah, and the reason I wanted to bring that up, Asia, is because our second book will be The Good Ancestor. And basically, a good ancestor saves what's good for the generations to come. Okay, that's our second book. So what have we been talking about tonight? Architecture and ancestry and preservation of significant places for the community, of the community. So that's what we've been doing. So not only do we have seasoned commissioners here, but we're continuing to learn and develop our brains and mentor each other in areas that others may not be familiar with. So I think this is just, timing couldn't be better because of what's coming to Morro Bay.
Thank you, Mike. And Asia, did you have any comments on the program tonight?
Thanks. Only to just say thank you. I'm really anxious to hopefully tour the school myself in the next couple of weeks since I missed it today. But I really appreciate the presentations and look forward to discussing further.
Yeah, you were missed tonight. So nice to hear from you. Joe, any comments?
Yeah, I do. There's an impression that's forming. This is a very old building. It has some very discernible architectural features. It's a reputed architect. And there's a lot of firsthand experiences with this building, either as parents or students. That speaks very well for keeping this building around.
Eric, final word?
I brought the parent-teacher conference report from my third grade teacher.
You can't read it, no.
And she said, Eric has shown most interest in creative writing and reading and art, but he does not put forth as much effort as some of the others. Eric's performance has been inconsistent. I'll leave the rest of it. It's funny. It's a funny story.
Thank you, Eric, and thanks for the introduction earlier. I really enjoyed it. Mike, final word?
Yeah, and I just wanted to say one more thing because I kind of teed it up a different way, but I want to give my input on just the school in general. That where I went to school in the Bay Area and in San Jose, we had an elementary school, which was Hester, junior high school, which is Hoover, and high school, which was Lincoln High School. My girlfriend's been with me, but we visited the middle school and the high school, but they tore down the elementary school, which was the biggest mistake San Jose ever made. And they've said it over and over and over again. And now the junior high school and the high school are considered state landmarks as well as local landmarks. So, I mean, you have to see them. I didn't bring pictures, but that kind of gets back to what we're doing here. Thank you.
A final thank you to all. And the very last word, I'm going to ask James Papp, send us out on a high note, please.
Oh, I don't know if this is a high note, but our mayor for 10 years in the 1970s was Ken Schwartz, a dear friend and a lovely man, a very thoughtful man. And I went to see him on his deathbed a few days before he died. And because I wanted to ask him which of his buildings and as architect he wanted us to landmark and what was important to him. And then having established this, I said, so what happened to the Murray Adobe? Because that was one of our really important buildings that was demolished or largely demolished. And he got visibly upset. This is 50 years after it happened. And he said, you know, we didn't have anyone to tell us about it. We didn't have money offered to preserve it. We didn't, there were all these things that people didn't come forward to do. There was will, but not that technical expertise. And I hope that I'm not on my deathbed thinking of 50 years before something that I could have done to save this or that building. It was a hugely important building to the conscience of our community, which I won't get into. But in what aspects? But it was that sense of personal, for Ken, personal loss, that at the moment everything seemed to go wrong, that they couldn't pull things together. And I think that is why the community is so important. If a community loves something, it can pull together for it, but it also creates, preservation does create a focal point for communities to define themselves and to understand themselves and to think about themselves, often in very serious ways that it doesn't want to think about them itself, but is good for it to think of itself. So yeah, that's my last memory of Ken is still thinking of what happened 50 years before.
James, thanks again for making the trek over here. We appreciate it. Our next regular Planning Commission meeting will be at the Veterans Building, Veterans Memorial Building. I've certainly enjoyed being here today. This place is really fun. And thanks everybody for hanging with us. I really wanted to get us out in an hour and a half, but so you stayed with us. Thanks for everybody on the Zoom call. We appreciate your attention. Marlene? Marlene, thank you. Thank you so much. I think this has been great, and I'd like now to adjourn. Thank you all very much.